Hello friends, welcome to the first in a short series of videos about making terrain. To my mind, terrain has to be three things. It has to be quick to make, it has to be easy to make, and it has to be durable. I make terrain for tournaments where people play the game Kings of War. Tournaments are high impact, high usage. I have to make a lot of it, so it has to be easy to make and it has to be quick. And when I say quick, what I mean is it has to come from readily available materials, so I'm not searching around on the internet and paying hundreds and hundreds of pounds for it. I did want to go with durable, inexpensive and quick, but that spelled something else. There are loads of resources online about how to make terrain, and if I'm really honest, that's where I stole all of my ideas from. But this is the way that I do it. You don't have to do it this way, but I just thought I'd give it a show. In this first video, I'm going to run through the materials that I use to make terrain. There's not many of them and they're pretty similar across everything that I do. I mostly make things like hills, a bit of kind of rough terrain, some fields, those sorts of things. Very easy to make. There's lots of different ways to make them, so I'm going to run through a few of them in a few short videos, but this is the one where we look at materials. The first material is foam. Everyone uses foam, there's lots of different types of foam. The number one type of foam that I use is polystyrene. Polystyrene tends to get poo-pooed by a lot of terrain makers, and they shouldn't be poo-pooing it because it's cheap, it's durable, and it's bloody everywhere. Pretty much anything you order these days comes packed with polystyrene, and it's a really good terrain material. It is high impact, high density, it's very bobbly, so we need to coat it, but that's okay because as I'm going to show you through the terrain videos, I coat everything in pretty much the same kind of terrain goop, which makes it super durable. I use polystyrene for nearly everything. It's not the only thing you can use. A lot of videos and a lot of terrain makers recommend XPS foam. XPS foam is high density. It's really good for carving if you're into carving your terrain using a knife or anything. XPS, it usually comes in blue or black insulation sheets. This actually was packaging that I got on something else that I ordered, which happened to be XPS foam, so I will be using that as well. It's really good for using for terrain, but it does run a little bit more expensive. It doesn't quite fit into my cheap bracket here like polystyrene does, but if you've got it, why not use it? And you can also use any old bloody foam. This is actually a bit of an old sofa cushion, which I have. It's very squishy, which makes it not so brilliant for things like hills. However, because I'm going to coat all of my terrain in a very durable, hard structure, you can use it as the base for your terrain if you want to. The next thing that I use is a hardboard. This is a simple ply hardboard. This sheet, which I'm going to show you here, is massive and cost me about a tenner from my local DIY store. It's not very expensive. We will need to coat it, and I'll be talking about that in a little bit, but it's very easy to cut and it makes a great base for your terrain. The last thing that I use for my terrain, apart from like saws and things like that, in terms of materials, is Terrain Goop. Terrain Goop is something I smear over absolutely everything, and it's got 4 key ingredients. The first is a common wall filler. Now, I've actually used stuff like tile glue because I did some tiling and I had some left over. It's pretty much all the same stuff. It's a strong, durable wall filler. On its own, though, it cracks really easily. In America, I believe you call this spackle. You can get it very cheap in your local stores. This tub was about £4. Bigger tubs are available for less money because volume. Great material. Like I say, it does crack easily though. So I also use PVA or white glue, wood glue. You mix it in to make it more flexible. We're going to show you some of that in a minute. Third ingredient is sand. You can buy giant bags of very pretty good quality sand from a builder's yard for not very much money. This sand actually comes from a giant barrel of sand that I have in my garden for absolutely no reason, that I filter out and then kind of cook to make sure it's not got any organic materials in it. But any kind of basing sand that you want to use, don't use the expensive stuff, use as cheap as possible. And then the cheapest possible brown paint. This brown paint cost me £1. It is a raw umber, burnt umber, that kind of colour is what you're looking for. We mix that in to make the Terrain Goop. So let's have a look at that mixing right now. Okay, Terrain Goop. So we're going to have an old pot. You can use the new pot, but I'm going to use an old one. The first thing that goes in is our spackle, our filler. That's the base, that's everything we use. As you see, it's quite flexible and soft. So we're just going to whack a bit of that in. We're just going to make a bit of Terrain Goop for this demonstration, but you can make it in bulk if you want. To our filler, we add a dob of PVA. You're going to want about, I'm going to say, 4 parts filler to 1 part PVA. Not enough so it's liquid, because you're going to add more liquid to it, but enough so it loosens up your Terrain Goop, so it's a lot easier to apply. So it's still gloopy, it's not going to run off, but it is nice and mobile. I'm going to say that's probably a little bit too mobile. We need to add more filler in. There we go. Lovely. Then we're going to add sand. Quite a bit. Again, it adds texture and also makes it a little bit less mobile. Then we're going to add some glue. Not glue, paint. We're going to add some paint. The reason we add paint isn't for anything other than when your terrain gets chipped, you don't want it to show too badly. It's going to show anyway because it's going to be different from the colour you've painted it. But if it's a nice dark brown, it's not going to be so much of a bother. There we go, lovely. Look at that. What we have here is our standard Terrain Goop, and that's the reason we don't mind using polystyrene, because this stuff goes on top of the polystyrene every single time. You never see the polystyrene as part of your terrain. All you see is this kind of grainy, earthy texture. Plus, because it's got filler in it, wall filler, that's made for your walls, it's incredibly durable. Let me show you an example. So here's a hill that's made from polystyrene. It's covered with this filler. You see I've textured it a little bit. This one hasn't been painted at all. It's simply a rock finish. Underneath, there's your polystyrene. That is as hard as rocks. It will very rarely break. It's really easy to touch up. That's the kind of thing we're going to be making in these videos. So this is another tool that I use really regularly. It is a hot wire. We use it to cut the foam. It cuts through polystyrene, it cuts through XPS, and it cuts through sofa foam just exactly the same. You can buy very expensive hot wires, really nice bedded hot wires that people use to carve. This one cost me a tenner off of eBay. It is cheap. It is my second one because one of them burnt out pretty quickly after using. You have to be very careful because they are not great quality. And critically, you have to wear a mask or be in a very well ventilated area, or even better, both when you're using them, because the kind of foams that XPS and polystyrene and sofa foam get off when you burn them with a hot wire are not great for your lungs, so always mask up. However, I find these brilliant. I'll be showing you how to use them in the individual videos that I'm making for each of the types of terrain, but a cheap hot wire off of eBay will serve you great. No need, I think, personally, to be investing in these really expensive ones unless you're doing quite advanced terrain work. What we are doing is putting together some durable terrain that's easy to make. Cheap hot wire, absolutely brilliant. Okay, this did cost a bit more. This is a, what do they call it? A jigsaw, which I use for cutting up the board. You can just use a regular old saw, which is much less expensive, just harder on your arms. This just makes it really quick and easy. And of course, some sandpaper that we use to make the wood nice when we've cut it up. Tools! We use tools! No surprise. The last thing we're going to need is some paint. For the love of God, please do not use your model paints on painting your terrain. I saw somebody who was using contrast paints to paint their terrain. Do you know contrast paints is roughly the same price as the stuff they use to coat stealth fighter jets? Guys, do not use contrast paints on terrain unless you just love spending money. I don't know. These kind of cheap poster paint tubes, really great for doing terrain with because they're really cheap and they don't matter. Even better, you can follow what Mel, the terrain tutor, recommends, which is these kind of tester pots of wall paint because they come in very small pots. They're the kind of quantity you want to use, and they're not very expensive because they're tester pots. These ones are from my local DIY store, but you can get cheaper ones from any kind of pound shop. This one is from Wilco, which is a pound shop near me. Unfortunately, the kind of colour palettes do change seasonally. We're looking for a dark colour, a dark kind of nearly black, a mid-grey, and you want to be getting a light grey as well. Brown is always good. A dark brown, a mid-brown, and it's always nice to have a bit of green. Any kind of colours, kind of terrainy colours you can get are better. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of terrain that we want to be painting that uses magnolia. In general, while spray paints are good, you need to be very careful what you use them on because spray paints do melt some types of foam, unless you want a kind of melty foam look, which is fine. Right, we've got our goop, our foam, we've got plywood, wherever I put it, somewhere, some old paint, some knackered old brushes you don't really care about, and a stick for spreading things. Let's make some terrain. I'll see you in the next video.